Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Thank you, Lucia, Chris, Claude, Taylor, and the whole team for inviting me. I don't know if I should thank you for having me speak right after what we just saw, which was definitely full of gestures. I wanted to speak to some gestures relating to love and war in Etel Adnan's work, which I see as, it's hard to describe, but perhaps a kind of cosmic endeavor occupying a vast expanse of imagination between Amerindian cosmologies and outer space explorations. And I hope that will become clearer after a few minutes. And I will try to do this via her writing and her visual work, and also via references to a few others, in particular Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish and Chilean poet and artist Cecilia Vicuña. And I should say one thing, which is that when I announced my title, which is Love, War, and a Bar Built on the Moon, I thought I would be speaking mainly about the moon. And then when I finished preparing my talk, I realized that I was not speaking about the moon at all. I mean, the moon in person. So perhaps what I should do is tell you why, or where the title comes from. It comes from the last page of this book, The Indian Never Had a Horse, by Etel Adnan from 1985. And it says, I am leaving behind my slumbering body to go into a lab where liberty is shut into a test tube. Angels are carrying me into this ascension. In the early hours, we are drinking a cup of coffee in a bar built on the moon. I will bring the ink, the key, and the secret on a future page. And then elsewhere is perhaps one of my favorite instances of the moon in her work, which may have relation to what we just saw. You refused a voyage to the moon in order to stay a moment more in bed. And the other thing about the moon is this. This is actually the first, I think it's not the first of Etel Adnan's books in English, but it's the first one with the Post-Apollo Press. I think it was 1982. And I'll just give you a quote from Simone Fattal, who is the founder of the Post-Apollo Press. She's also a sculptor, and she is also the partner of Etel Adnan. And when she was asked about where the name the Post-Apollo Press came, which is a press she basically started to publish Etel Adnan's work initially, and went on to publish many other people, she said the Post-Apollo Press's name came from the Apollo program that took man and women to the moon. This unreachable destination, the symbol of the sky, for it is the companion of the night, was made possible by the Apollo program. I thought at the time, the same way I think today, that for mankind to leave gravity and head for the universe was the beginning of a new era. Therefore, we could count the years with the post-Apollo the way we did with BC and AD. So I said, let's call it post-Apollo. And then the logo is the moon, the crescent moon, as you can see, and it was drawn by Etel Adnan. So there will not be much moon in what follows, but remember, it's always there even when you don't see it. There is a phrase in W.H. Auden's poem In Memory of William Butler Yeats that I think about often. It is not the much quoted one to the effect that poetry makes nothing happen. It is one that comes just before it, and it says, Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. It makes me wonder, does one become a poet as a consequence of external circumstances? Or are there, as it were, natural-born poets who then choose to engage or not engage with the circumstances of their life and age? It came back to me while preparing for this talk, in part because Etel Adnan's work sometimes makes me think of the poems of the later W.B. Yeats, a certain late style that Edward Said beautifully analyzed, a kind of fierce wisdom or a very dense simplicity. Did Mad Beirut hurt Etel Adnan into poetry? I don't know. In a short autobiographical essay titled To Write in a Foreign Language, she recounts her years of living and teaching in California in the 1960s. The Vietnam War was raging on. She came across a small, and at the time her writing language was French. She came across a small literary journal that was publishing anti-war poetry. She went home and wrote a poem in English, The Ballad of the Lonely Knight, Knight K-N-I-G-H-T, in present-day America, and sent it to the Gazette in question. A few days later, she received a letter of acceptance. She had become a poet in the English language. You could say that much of Etel Adnan's work, explicitly in her writing and implicitly in her painting, is an attempt at coming to terms with what it means to be in a time of war, to borrow the title of a section from one of her books. Even the periods of peace tend to be lower intensity wars. As she writes in one of her letters to Fawaz, a book from 1993, the battles have ceased, but the violence remains. Love and war have been intertwined in Etel Adnan's life since before her birth. Her mother was a Christian Greek from Smyrna, where her father, a Muslim Syrian officer of the Ottoman army, was stationed. It was a union of a rare kind in the context of cosmopolitan Smyrna, where cosmopolitanism mainly meant the coexistence of communities separately, and also in the context of the Ottoman Empire in general. In a way, it was a doomed union. The Great Fire of Smyrna broke out in 1922 at the hands of the Ottoman army and provoked the end of a world, certainly the end of Etel's mother's world. The marriage did survive, though, and the couple left for Beirut, where Etel was born in 1925 and was to later witness other wars. In Undying Love, or Love Dies, published by the Post-Apollo Press, Jalal Tawfiq writes that two of the greatest cinematic love stories, René Duras's Hiroshima Mon Amour and Chris Marker's La Jetée, take place against the backdrop of the destruction of the city and possibly of the world. Every love of a man and a woman takes place in seclusion from the world. Every love of a man and a woman has for horizon the destruction of the world, since they can restart the human race. This is one of the ways love is linked to death. Noah must be a great lover, a subject yet to be explored. Etel Adnan has never been to Smyrna, and in a few seconds we'll see some images. She has never been to Smyrna, though for a while she was thinking of going there with Lebanese artist Joanna Haji Thomas, whose grandfather was from there. Unfortunately, Etel cannot travel by airplane anymore, so Joanna went to Smyrna by herself for the first time last year to, as she says, bring back images of Smyrna for Etel. She and her partner Khalil Jurej made a film called Smyrna, which is in part a conversation with Etel about Smyrna and Joanna's images of Smyrna and about family memories and trauma. The film was premiered this year at the Jeux de Paume in Paris just a few months ago. It's never been shown in the UK. I will show two short excerpts from it with thanks to the artists, and this is the first one. So here she speaks, Etel speaks of a problème moral problem. War and its consequences create moral dilemmas or heighten the moral dilemmas of life. Etel Adnan in her work tackles these dilemmas head on. Not that she can or that she wants to solve them. As you saw in the film excerpt, she is kind of simply stating the parameters of the dilemma. But she manages to look them in the eye, to linger with the situation, even in incomprehension, especially in incomprehension. There's no heroic impulse there, just a willingness to, as she writes elsewhere, submit the self to itself and to patiently contemplate, behind problems, the blocks of tension that compose them. For all the meditative nature of much of her recent writing, one of the most admirable traits for me in the work and personality of Etel Adnan is her willingness to confront any experience in the moment, including the experience of war. As Lucia mentioned, Sit Mary Rose was the first or one of the first novels written after the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War, and Etel wrote it in the space of a month. To be in a time of war is the final chapter of her book, In the Heart of Another Country. It is implacable in its prosaism, in its infinitive objectivity, and it is one of Etel's most poignant and poetic texts at the same time. It comes as an unexpected yet necessary conclusion to a meditative book published in 2004, and I will read you a page from it. And this chapter is maybe 25 pages or so. To wake up, to stretch, to get out of bed, to dress, to stagger towards the window, to be ecstatic about the garden's beauty, to observe the quality of the light, to distinguish the roses from the hyacinths, to wonder if it rained in the night, to establish contact with the mountain, to notice its color, to see if the clouds are moving, to stop, to go to the kitchen, to grind some coffee, to lit the gas, to heat water, hear it boiling, to make the coffee, to put off the gas, to pour the coffee, to decide to have some milk with it, to bring out the bottle, to pour the milk in the aluminum pan, to heat it, to be careful, to pour, to mix the coffee with the milk, to feel the heat, to bring the cup to one's mouth, to drink again, to face the day's chores, to stand and go to the kitchen, to come back and put the radio on, to bring the volume up, to hear that the war against Iraq has started. To rise early, to hurry down to the driveway, to look for the paper, take it out from its yellow bag, to read on the front page, war, to notice that war takes half a page, to feel a shiver down the spine, to tell that that's it, to know that they dared, that they jumped the line, to read that Baghdad is being bombed, to envision a rain of fire, to hear the noise, to be heartbroken, to stare at the trees, to go up slowly while reading, to come back to the front page, read war again, to look at the world, to look at the word as if it were a spider, to feel paralyzed, to look for help within oneself, to know helplessness, to pick up the phone, to give up, to get dressed, to look through the windows, to suffer from the day's beauty, to hate to death the authors of such crimes, to realize that it's useless to think, to pick up the purse, to go down the stairs, to see people smashed to a pulp, to say yes indeed the day is beautiful, not to know anything, to go on walking, to take notice of people's indifference towards each other, etc. Well, why not? In certain situations, some gestures become especially meaningful, and perhaps they are the only possible ones. The gesture of describing, which is also a gesture of enduring, the gesture of being alive, of perceiving. As she writes in Journey to Mount Tamalpais, and I introduce you to Mount Tamalpais, we are most of the time painting, but this is beside the point. Our involvement is with perception. To go back to the moral problem described in the film excerpt, should Etel's mother have refused the advances of the Lebanese businessman and kept the family bankrupt? What is the price she paid for being unfaithful to her husband out of her very love and respect for him? There is a recent short essay Etel wrote for Documenta in 2012 that Lucia mentioned under the title "The Cost for Love We Are Not Willing to Pay." In it, she compares Nietzsche to Al-Hallaj, a Sufi poet who lived 10 centuries earlier. I quote, "Both let themselves be consumed by an itinerary toward the absolute, God for the one, the transmutation and explosion of values for the other. The overriding principle that ruled Al-Hallaj was love, the desire to approach and penetrate the fire of the divine will until death. Al-Hallaj welcomed his condemnation to death by torture and crucifixion as a natural price for his passion. As for himself, Nietzsche chose as a price for the freedom to pursue his search an utter solitude that led him to insanity." There's, of course, a long tradition of love madness in Arabic poetry, the best known example of which is the story of Qais, otherwise known as Majnoon, the mad one, who declaims poetry while wandering in the Arabian desert because he won't be with his beloved Layla anymore, and he wanders to exhaustion. In a chapter from his Kitab al-Tawasin, Al-Hallaj expounds on the Quranic story of Iblis, who was the intimate companion of God, but was expelled from paradise and transformed into Satan when he refused to obey the divine command of kneeling before the newly created Adam. I quote from a translation of the Quran. Then we told the angels to bow before Adam, and they did, except for Iblis, who was scornful and acted proud and became a disbeliever. In commenting on this Quranic passage, Al-Hallaj comes to the defense of Iblis, that is to say, he takes the side of Satan, explaining that the latter disobeyed God for love of God, considering God's command to pray before Adam to be a simple test of loyalty. I quote, "By his reality I have not erred concerning the designing, tadbir, nor rejected the destining, taqdir, nor concerned myself with the change in imaging, taswir, nor am I in such measures the one to be judging. Even if he torments me with his fire forever and beyond, I will not bow before any other than him, abase myself before a figure and body, or recognize a rival or offspring. My proclamation is the proclamation of those who are sincere, and in love I am triumphant." So let's go back to the film excerpt that we watched earlier. Many things interest me in it. For instance, the fact that Etel is talking about the world of her parents, her mother's longing for a Smyrna that is a lost paradise she will never return to, her father's world, that of the Ottoman Empire, to which he had dedicated his life and which is entirely over, dismantled. These are worlds she herself has not lived in, but she knows them intimately. They are part of her being. She uses the image of memory as something imprinted, like a photographic plate. Magnetic transmission. It is a well-known phenomenon among children of Holocaust survivors, for instance, and scholar Marianne Hirsch coined the term post-memory, referring to the overshadowing of one's lived experience by the memory of a more significant past that one's parents lived through. There's a passage in Etel Adnan's poem sequence, Manifestations of the Voyage, from 1985, that reads, "Sumptuous days preceded my birth, as if they were the coldness of the snow, shipwrecked is my memory." And think of people leaving Izmir on ships after the Great Fire of 1922. One of the things that situations of war and exile produce is a warping of temporality, or a warping of the time-space continuum, if you will. You live in the ruins of your memory, or of other people's memories, in a time that is structured like a labyrinth. You're suspended between its entrance, located in the past, and the hope of its exit, located in the future, both of which are now equally inaccessible. You don't remember entering the labyrinth, but you are stuck inside. In Etel's long poem sequence titled The Manifestations of the Voyage, there is a recurring motif of stairs. For instance, the stairway that separates my room from my memory whispers in my ear. And these stairs often lead nowhere. They are a metaphor for being stranded between life and death, or between past and future. Another quote, "I found earth castles on the edge of the desert's torrents. I took their marble stairs, but could not find my way either up or down. Then I understood that I was in a state of non-reason and non-madness, and that the gardens of Andalusia were standing ready to die." In the film excerpt that we saw, Etel presents oral transmission as a means of survival in the context of the Middle East's absence of archives, orality as a tool for securing a form of generational continuity, storytelling as an instrument of time travel. During her years of living in California, she also found a way of living at peace, so to speak, with the present, or at least to settle in an uncomfortable present, and that she achieved through painting. Through painting one particular mountain, Mount Tamalpais, and you can see some images of those paintings, and by painting it repeatedly for decades, like Cézanne with Mont Sainte-Victoire or Hokusai with Mount Fuji. Etel's works are small paintings done in one sitting, truly an experience of being in the present tense, of inhabiting the moment. She wrote about it in a gorgeous book, Journey to Mount Tamalpais, which was first published in 1986 and which is a kind of ars poetica. And I just wanted to show you some of these images before we see a second film excerpt. I am not making the claim that in painting Mount Tamalpais, Etel is actually painting the mountains of Smyrna that she has never seen. The filmmakers are not really making that claim either, though it is a stimulating thought. I quote from Journey to Mount Tamalpais, "We need the mountain in order to be, or to disappear. When we return from the Sierras, we see it on the horizon and we know it is home. Its form is the substance of what we are. When I make a gesture, casually, I draw it in the air without even realizing it." The gesture of drawing, painting, is a gesture of remembrance. The quote is ended. The gesture of remembering what we have no memory of, in a way, beyond the generations, beyond the wars. In the Al-Hallaj text that I quoted from earlier about Iblis and Satan, there is a phrase, الذكر لا يذكر, and the whole sort of variations on memory and remembrance, dhikr, which translates as remembrance does not remember, or remembrance does not need to remember. In the Springflower Zone, Etel writes, "My memory spills over my days, and like a balloon occupies the whole universe." So, as I said, painting in the present is one of Etel's answers to being stuck in the labyrinth of a memory not her own. But sometimes she resorts to a past beyond modern times by endeavoring to learn from the lived philosophies of indigenous people, namely Native Americans, the original inhabitants of Mount Tamalpais, or by exploring the lives and symbolism of ancient or mythic figures, especially feminine figures such as Antigone or the Byzantine Empress Theodora. And yet, at other times, in fact quite often, she resorts to a radical future, which you could call Adnano-futurism, in reference to Afrofuturism. I quote, "The sky is the beginning of a new continent. Unmapped is my space, uncharted my vision." If war and colonization have mapped and remapped the world ad nauseum, then the sky, the outer space that humanity was starting to explore in the 1960s, provided an opportunity for new beginnings. And I'll give just a few quotes from different books, poetry and prose. "Let me look at you while your limbs carry grace. The wind takes you into the future. Everything will be clean because you will have left for the farthermost planets." "I was the first astronaut. Oh, how wide and lonesome is the moon, bearing the flag of my insanity on its soil." "When I thought a bird was flying, it was the sound of water. I thought a stream was running. It was the wind. Tamalpais became a spaceship ready to take off. Tamalpais is my spaceship." At my right, the Tiburon Hills are somberly yellow. They have a strange power in their color. Is this pale gold on the surface of these hills so extraneous to its own place that it makes my mind jump into the notion of some past I never knew and which still, strangely, I relate to? Do colors have the power to break the time barrier and carry us into outer spaces? Not only those made of miles and distances, but those of the accumulated experiences of life since its beginning or unbeginning. You still all okay? Shall I go on? I could stop here and let you think about it. But here's the second part. In the Etel Adnan exhibition at the Sackler Gallery that I visited this afternoon, I was happy to see a leporello I didn't know from 2013, a recent one that she made. You know, she has this practice of it was her own way from the 60s on to sort of reconnect with the Arabic language that she grew up amongst, but that she never learned enough to speak it fluently or to write it. But in the early 1960s, she was in the United States, and the Algerian War was happening, the Algerian War of Independence. And she was writing in French, and she couldn't write in French anymore because that in a way identified her with the French. And she didn't write in English yet. And she discovered these Japanese folding notebooks, and she started using them to, draw and also to copy Arabic poems by other poets. Just copy them without necessarily understanding the full meaning of them, but understanding as through a veil. And she has a phrase somewhere, she has a sentence somewhere where she says, well, I couldn't write in French anymore, so I decided to paint in Arabic, which is an interesting one. So one of those Leporelli, recent one, carries copying that she did of a poem by Mahmoud Darwish that is Arama Urid, I see what I want. And I'll give you a translation of two of the stanzas in it. They're little quatrains. I see what I want of war. I see our ancestors' limbs squeeze the springs green in a stone, and our fathers inherit the water, but bequeath nothing, and I close my eyes. The country within my hands is of my hands. I see what I want of love. I see horses making the meadow dance, 50 guitars sighing, and a swarm of bees suckling the wild berries, and I close my eyes until I see our shadow behind this dispossessed place. So there are several of these. The translation is by Fadi Jouda. It's available online where I found it an hour ago. In 1992, while living in Parisian exile, Mahmoud Darwish published a book titled Ahada Ashara Kawkaban, 11 Planets, which he wrote, I quote, to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the expulsion from Spain and Columbus's arrival in America. Those two events, in 1492, marking the beginnings of European imperialism, may be read as historical precedents for the Palestinian Nakba of 1948. In the Arab imagination, Al-Andalus, Andalusia, is the name of the lost paradise, a site of lament and nostalgia. Remember Etel's lines that I read earlier, and that the gardens of Andalusia were standing ready to die. It's a trope, comes back all the time in Arab poetry. However, says Darwish, the point is to go beyond that. Quote, my view is not that Andalus is mine, and my view is not that Palestine is the lost Andalus. I attempted to create, and this is talking about his book, I attempted to create a dialogue among the exiles on earth, and I claimed no right to Andalus. Within Darwish's book, 11 Planets, is a long lyric epic titled The Red Indian's Penultimate Speech to the White Man, which is an address from an indigenous Amerindian to colonialist European civilization. It's a meditation on the links between modernity and exclusion, and it is a plea to spare and preserve the native ways. Through a joint commemoration of two dispossessions on different continents, these poems convert the politics of nostalgia into a politics of solidarity, a dialogue among the exiles, as he said, which is precisely in part what allows Darwish to speak in the voice of a Native American man. Etel Adnan has a book of poems, published a little earlier, 1985, titled The Indian Never Had a Horse. In it, she does not speak in the voice of a native, at least not directly. She has an intercessor, which is the mountain, or which is more generally nature. In a text about Etel's painting, Simon Fattal quotes Etel saying something like, when I die, nature will have lost its best friend. You might consider Etel Adnan to be a landscape painter, and indeed she has mainly painted semi-abstract landscapes. And she has often spoken of the view on Mount Tamalpais from her window as appeasing and centering, and of the activity of painting as an experience of joy, contrary to writing. And there are no humans in her paintings, while her texts are full of characters. But the mountain, in its deceiving calmness, is actually a cipher of very deep issues, the very ones that she deals with in her writing. As she writes, painting landscapes is creating cosmic events. The actual space of a painting, its very dimensions, is the space of memory. Mount Tamalpais is a cipher of colonialism, having been stolen from American natives by Europeans, and therefore it is a site of dispossession and a site of resistance and potential revolt. I quote, "The Indian called the mountain Tamalpa, the one close to the sea. The Spaniard called it Malpais, bad country. The difference between the native and the conqueror is readable in these two different perceptions of the same reality. Let us be the Indian, and let be. What is close to the sea shall remain close to the sea." What Darwish and Adnan do in their poetry is make us aware that landscape is political, and they make us aware of the relevance of the Indian's voice because the structure of colonialism has not changed. The same violence is still being perpetrated on the scale of the planet as a whole. In a poem sequence by Etel Adnan, which is in French and has not appeared in English yet, though it is translated, it's called Ce ciel qui n'est pas, is this passage. J'ai vu un ciel sans ciel, un abîme dans un abîme, une porte sur le rien. I saw a sky without sky, an abyss in an abyss, a door onto nothing. The sky itself is being colonized by a combination of global warming, satellite surveillance, armed drones. Darwish's native protagonist saw it coming. I quote, "In a little while you will erect your world upon our world. From our cemeteries you will open the road to the artificial moon." The conjunction between stars and words is a topos of Amerindian cosmologies. According to Dennis Tedlock, he's an anthropologist in the US who translated the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is the Mayan book of the dawn of life. He translated it into English. It's an old 16th century text. According to Dennis Tedlock, to read and write in Mayan is to tie together bundles of starry light. The sky is a screen or a canvas that we must train to read from. In Mahmoud Darwish's words, our souls, or his Red Indian character's words, our souls are high, our pasture is sacred, and the stars are illuminated speech. If you stared into them, you would read our story entire. I quote from Etel's Ce ciel qui n'est pas. Il reste un étouffement et un vouloir qui s'identifient au ciel. There remains a choking and a will which identifies with the sky. In other words, the sky is a record of history, but it is also a record of desires. As Chilean artist and poet Cecilia Vicuña points out, desire, from the Latin desiderare, to long for, was formed in an analogy with considerare, which is to observe the stars carefully, to think with the stars, considerare. Desire is a thirst for light. While he was in Béjaïa, which is in current Algeria, the Sufi poet and thinker Ibn Arabi, who is one of the most important Sufi poets, and Etel refers him here and there. So Ibn Arabi had a vision that he recounts in a book of his called Kitab al-Ba. He dreamt that he made love to the stars, to all the stars, one by one, with overwhelming spiritual pleasure. This is literally written this way, and I should read you the Arabic passage. It's wonderful. And after the stars, he made love to all the letters of the Arabic alphabet in their isolated and combined positions. This is also a literal translation. This was in Ramadan of the year 597, which corresponds to the year 1200 in the Gregorian calendar. Ibn Arabi was setting off on his journey to the east, leaving Al-Andalus for good. He does not dwell at length on this vision, though he makes clear that it impregnated him with the knowledge of astrology and with the science of letters that would become one of the esoteric foundations of his philosophy. In so doing, the greatest Sufi thinker of the unity of being asserts the intimacy between earth and sky and the sensual basis of all knowledge. While she was visiting Murcia in Spain, Etel Adnan sent a letter to Fawaz Trabulsi in which she says, Ibn Arabi pursued the whole when all the details were falling one after the other around him. He had foreseen the fall. This is something we see Etel Adnan doing throughout her work. She writes, I read in an old page of my journals, March 13, 1967. Today, all the memories of the universe as universe and I become one in front of the mountain. Etel Adnan is always reaching for the maximum of openness to experience, for the most encompassing view of the world, often identifying or symbolically exchanging places with animals, plants, people, and so on. A quote among many, "O my tree, my own, shall we transcend species and gender to exchange, O once, pleasure and knowledge." This is in the Manifestations of the Voyage. In the Sufi tradition, there is an effacement of boundaries that opens the possibility of intimacy with the beloved, be it the master, God, the stars, the letter of the alphabet, you name it. Sufi intimacy is premised on a kind of a materiality without materialism. Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, an 8th century Sufi woman from Basra, insists, I don't want the house, with a capital H, I want the Lord of the house. No degree of separation is tolerable. The cosmic link must be direct. Rabia again, ever since I knew him, I've turned my back on all he has made, he, capital H. Or also, I am so afraid of separation that I have never yet owned a knife. And to link this to Amerindian philosophies again, in the Nahuatl language, the creator or giver of life is invoked with the name, I won't pronounce this properly, Tloque Nawake, which literally means the owner of togetherness and nearness. As Etel Adnan said at the Transformation Marathon at the Serpentine last year, we have much to learn from the Indians because they don't have a formal religion. Their religion is total communication with their environment. So I'm closing soon. According to Cecilia Vicuña, I quote, the main contribution of the indigenous cultures of the world is the awareness of reciprocity. In the Andes, people say life is aini, which means reciprocity. By contrast, unmanned aerial vehicles, the drones I referred to earlier, are the most extreme incarnation of an ideology that aims at maintaining power by literally doing away with the possibility of reciprocity. A combination of satellite surveillance and video gaming, drone warfare separates the combatant from the battlefield, allowing him or her to wreak havoc without enduring danger. Under the guise of limiting death by making use of targeted strikes, it enforces, and I hope Eyal is not planning on, I'm not, anyway. Under the guise of limiting death by making use of targeted strikes, it enforces an essential asymmetry in the right to life, allowing operators to kill remotely from the safety of a Nevada airbase. In a recent text, Cecilia Vicuña suggests a link between drone warfare and our relation to language. She says, drones are the ultimate expression of our disconnect with words, our ability to speak without feeling the effect of our words on others. They make parts of the earth, so end quote, they make parts of the earth live under constant threat from the sky via a low continuous humming sound, the sound of our killing thoughts. And to give one last quote from Etel's Ce ciel qui n'est pas, les mots sont assis parmi nous, mais regardent d'autres paysages. Où sommes-nous? The words are seated among us, but look at other landscapes. Where are we? And perhaps that is a good reason why we need poets, now more than ever, to help us remedy our disconnect with words. Thank you.